Welcome to the Leadwell podcast, where we give mission-driven leaders principled and practical advice so that you can do just that, lead well. I'm your host, John Kidwell, but I'm not going to be doing a lot of the episode today. I get to ask some questions. We have a very special guest, Tony Miltenberger, who is here with us today from Follow to Lead Coaching. Let's jump right into the interview and time with Tony. Hey, Tony, thank you for being with us today.
John, thank you so much. It's an incredible honor to be here. I love your work and the way you're helping leaders and equipping them. It's good stuff, man.
Thank you. So as I'm preparing for this, what I realize is that you, Tony, are an author. You're married to your high school sweetheart. You have 3 amazing kids. You live in the Midwest. And while I don't live in the Midwest anymore, I basically thought I'm going to be talking to myself today.
Our stories do parallel each other very well.
They do, except for you are also a veteran. And I just want to say thank you for your service, Tony.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Amazing thing. So you have Follow to Lead Coaching, where you work with folks, especially coaching folks to follow Jesus and lead boldly. And this name Follow to Lead is an interesting thing. Not everybody might get that, but in a culture where we don't always follow when we lead, can you tell us a little bit about the play on that name and where that comes from?
Yeah, it's really rooted out of scripture, right? And in the Gospel of John, in the 13th chapter, there's a really interesting thing. As I've studied leaders all over the world, and the one that has resonated with me just over and over again is seeing the life of Jesus and how he led a movement that sustained even when he was gone. And in John 13, there's a really interesting thing where a story about Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Now, the disciples are the people that were his closest followers. So in order to scale his organization, he invested heavily in a very small group of people. And then he invested in such a way where he began to serve them. In a sense, he was a follower, right? And so in John 13, there's a part of the text that says, knowing that he was from God and returning to God, so he got up from the table, he removed his outer tunic, and he began to wash the disciples' feet. And what's interesting, and I think so many people miss it, is that word so. And I would circle it in my Bible if I were you, or underline it. If you're someone who reads the scriptures like that, I would say that so piece is a signifier of his identity, knowing who he was, where he was from, and what he was here to do. He got up, he became vulnerable, intimate, and he served his closest followers. And so I think there's a model there that's worth repeating, that if we really want to be a great leader, we have to learn how to serve and be a great follower.
That is awesome, Tony. Thank you for sharing that. And you also said some really interesting things around something that you're working on and spending a lot of time focusing on. And while Jesus wasn't broken, you said he knew who he was, his identity, and then he was intimate, he was vulnerable, and served out of that, right? And you've been doing some work around working with leaders on their woundedness, their brokenness. Tell us a little bit more about that and what that means.
It's really interesting, right, John? Like in my work, I've probably done counseling or coaching with hundreds, if not thousands, of different leaders. And one of the things I've noticed is that every person that I've counseled has been broken in some way. Now, when I talk about brokenness, there's a theological term for it called the epistemic consequence of sin. But psychologically, it's just broken people, right? Like, and that's really what it all boils down to, is that almost every human, without fail, I actually haven't met one yet. That's why I use the word almost, just in case someone's out there, has an experience between the ages of 4 and 12 that becomes a defining moment in their life. Now, typically, that brokenness is not anyone's malicious intent, right? So to be clear, I'm not talking about trauma. I'm talking about just a way that you grew up, a way that you saw the world, kind of the lens. And here's where it gets interesting. That lens follows us for the rest of our lives. And anytime someone bumps up against that wound, it causes an emotional spike. right? And so one of the ways that you can kind of begin to assess what your wounding is ask yourself, when was I last spiked on a scale from 1 to 10 above a 6? So on an emotional intensity scale, anytime you're spiked above a 6, it's almost always more about you than it is the other person. Now, here's what's wild. That spike, that emotional intensity spike, it can be good or bad. So let me give you a couple examples to put some handles on it.
All
My
right.
son is a senior and he's a linebacker in Ohio, which happens to have the best football in the United States.
Arguably, I have to stand up for my state, but arguably continue. Sorry to cut you off, Tony.
It was a jab at Texas. Okay. So, if he picks six, takes one to the house, scores a touchdown, and I go full blown Midwestern dad, I'm basically losing my mind on the sidelines. The question that I really have to wrestle with is my excitement really about him, or is it really about the way that this moment makes me look and feel? And I would argue that the emotional intensity above a 6 really makes it more about me than it does about him. So that's in a positive way. Now, in a negative way, right through Ohio, and you grew up in Michigan, so you know I-75 is the major interstate that goes north to south. If I'm driving on 75 and somebody cuts me off and I give them the international sign of peace, and I begin to use a whole bunch of words that don't necessarily represent my values, which I've been known to do, full disclosure, then is it really about that person who cut me off, or is it about the way that I feel in that moment? And so I would suggest that what happens is they bump up against your wound. Now, here's what's crazy, leader. I know you're listening. You're thinking, okay, I want to know what my wound is. Well, this is how I believe God works in our lives, is that your greatest gift is on the other side of your wound. Your greatest gift is on the other side of your wound. John, are you open to be a little vulnerable with me today?
I am. I am. Let's go there, Tony. What have you
What would
got
you
for me?
say that your greatest gift is?
Teaching.
Teaching, right? Specifically, what about teaching? What about teaching makes you feel so fulfilled?
I think being able to do a couple of things, but one is give somebody information that they can have to change their life.
Mhm.
I think that teaching, as well as like going on a journey with someone for where they want to go, is a really exciting piece. And I would be lying if I didn't say I kind of like being up in front of people and being able to put on a little bit of a show.
So that is an incredible gift, and I appreciate the honesty there. That's good. That's not uncommon. As a matter of fact, that's very common when it comes to teachers. And so I would suggest, and you and I haven't talked about this, we didn't do any pre-work or anything like that,
Nope,
but I would
zero.
suggest that your biggest wound is probably those moments in life where you don't feel seen.
Yeah, that's a great that's a great read that I very much desire affirmation, a desire validation, to be able to be heard. Tony and I haven't prepped on this, but y'all can tell some of this work has probably been done before in different circles. And so affirmation, validation, wanting to be seen, wanting to be recognized, if left unchecked, also seeking the spotlight instead of
Yeah.
just accepting and being in the spotlight, right? So 100%, it makes total sense, Tony.
Right. And so then probably, I'm going to guess somewhere between the ages of 4 and 12, by no fault of your parents or the environment that you were in, there was a season in your life where you didn't feel seen or heard.
Yeah, I can't think of that one off the top of my head. I can think of other ones, right, that
Sure.
I've talked about because we're huge fans of counseling and
Yeah.
in kind of group coaching, and we do that, not counseling, but group coaching, and encourage leaders all the time that you should have a really good counselor. And I can't think of one between the ages of 4 and 12, but I can absolutely think of times where I've not felt seen or validated or affirmed, and I might have to dig around a little bit to see which piece of it is there in between 4 and 12.
It would be interesting. So typically,
Yeah.
if it's not clear, it could be the way that where are you in the birth order?
Oh, I'm number 1.
Okay. Right. So
Yeah.
uh so
No
again,
pride or anything in and around that one.
right. Well, so it's interesting, right? Because it's, here's the thing about this kind of work is that it's deeply connected to how we are done in our family, right? So tell me about your other brothers and sisters.
I have a younger brother who's 4-ish years younger than I am, and it's just the two of us with mom and dad.
So that's really interesting, right? Now, I would wonder if at the age of 4, when you first had 4 years with your parents, all to yourselves, if all of a sudden, by no fault of anyone, a younger brother comes on the scene, you're already pretty well developed into your life rhythm, and then now the rest of your young adulthood is kind of circling around taking care of your brother, needing to be there for him, doing things for him as the oldest, right? You can be kind of, and again, all speculation here. We're just doing this on the
Totally.
fly, right? But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would wonder if there isn't something there about the idea that at 4 years old, your parents brought someone else into your world, and that gap is the basis of the wound.
Hmm. Maybe. What I'm taking away from this, Tony, is I get to go to my brother and say,
Yeah,
it's all right, fault,
absolutely.
brother. Yeah, no, I'm totally kidding. But I can absolutely see where there might be that, right? And as
Yeah,
we said, all speculation, and no doubt some of that plays in there. I've always said I'm a huge fan of it's nature and nurture
sure.
that we get to play with both of those. And so we have leaders that are listening that are no doubt starting to potentially identify with the same one that I just said, kind of on the validation, the seen, affirmed. Maybe there's this completely different. Um, what do we start to do now, right? Once we know, what do we start to do since we know that we can change and be aware of it and get back to using that strength as an absolute strength? How do we do that, Tony?
That's a great question. And what I would say is that it really starts and ends with the emotional intensity scale. I think leaders most often make big mistakes when they make a decision based off an emotional reaction. And so anytime you're above a 6 is when I would encourage you to step back, to evaluate, and to kind of take a moment to really examine your feelings, right? Ask the question, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? When have I felt this way before? Right. So what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? When have I felt this way before? Because what we have to do is really get to a place where we're not making decisions out of our wounds. And so when we're wounded and that emotional intensity goes through the charts, it's when you're most likely to make a bad decision. I come from a recovery background. I've got 10 years sober, and we always say hungry,
Congratulations.
angry, lonely, tired. Thank you. Thank you. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired is when you're most likely to make a bad decision because it messes with your emotional intensity. Now, what I know a lot of leaders do, right? What I have done myself is I'll get a report with our KPIs or whatever it is we're working on, and then I'll immediately assume responsibility for that. And so in an emotional state, I'll overreact, right? Instead of taking the time to ask the question, is this what is this emotional response really about? Why am I feeling this way? When have I felt it before? What is this all about? Kind of investigating the emotional intensity. Bring the scale down so I can respond intelligently with kind of better parameters on how we can make this better. I actually believe that wisdom at its core is becoming so familiar with our wounds that they no longer have the authority to make decisions in our lives.
Ooh, would you say that again? That was really good, Tony.
Wisdom at our core is becoming so familiar with our wounds that they no longer have authority to make decisions in our lives.
Hmm.
And that's what I want for me. And honestly, that's what I want for every leader, whether I'm working with them or somebody else is. If we could just get a bunch of level-headed people in a room, I think great things can happen. and acknowledging, we bring our whole soul to work with us. We bring everything to work with us. And so as a leader, I want to be able to see the wounds and the brokenness of my people, see the gifts of my people, and give them space to have those feelings in the midst of the workday and say, okay, hey, go have your feeling, right? And then let's talk about what the next best thing is.
How great. What a transition from what many of us have probably heard and felt and experienced and probably done ourselves with the International Sign of Peace and other things. Hurt people.
Yeah.
And what I hear you saying is healed people have the power to heal people, help people, lead people for whatever is needed in the moment, and to be able to do that extremely well.
Yeah,
It's really
it's
powerful.
Thank you. It's been a work over the last couple of years that has just continued to see some lasting effects in the people that I have the privilege to lead and work with.
Amazing. And Tony, you have a podcast, the Reclamation Podcast, and the website is Follow to Lead Coaching. Where and how can we specifically engage with you to get more on this from you? Where would you send us, Tony?
Yeah, I would say follow to lead, follow the number 2 leadcoaching.com is a great place to start. It's got all of my information there. If you are somebody who, like me, likes to get outcomes, I have a quiz. If you go /quiz, there's a quiz available for you to kind of judge where you are in your what I call your walk of integrity, how you're integrating your faith and your values with your walk, right? And that's kind of one of the things that we really love to help leaders with, is to live out a fully integrated or a life of integrity. And so I'm also on Instagram at TWMelt, on LinkedIn under the same name at TWMelt. I'm embarrassingly easy to find.
I love it. And I hope y'all go find him at Instagram. I already follow him and get a bunch of his great videos as soon as they come. And check him out at number 2 leadcoaching.com. We'll put all the links in the show notes. Tony, I have been blessed by today, and I am significantly more aware of some of the things that are going to trip me up as a leader because of how I kind of grew up. And so I also have a very, very clear way to gauge that emotional intensity level, and then some questions, right? What's going on? Why? When have I felt this way before? To one of the ones that's my favorite questions is, okay, so I know all these things. What is required of me right now? And you have given us a path to be able to do that and to show up and to lead well. Thank you so much, Tony, for being here and for giving us all of that today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, John. And I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. You'll be on my podcast
right. Yes,
too.
We're going to do that.
That's right. I'm so excited about that. So if you want to hear more from John, make sure you find him on my podcast as well, so we can dive more into his story.
That's right. And you can see how Tony introduces me. And if we go back into the time warp and the all of the same things that we have extremely similar in our lives. So y'all, it has been wonderful. Thanks for joining Tony and I talking about leadership today. And we wish you the best. Be well, lead on, and God bless.